Good evening and welcome back to Sleevore. Tonight, I invite you into a quieter corner of Victorian London, a place of falling snow, glowing shop windows, and the soft hush that settles over the city during Christmas time. This is a story not of fear nor of shadows lurking in the dark, but of chance, choice, and the small kindnesses that reveal who we truly are. Our tale is drawn from one of Sherlock Holmes' most gentle mysteries, the Blue Carbuncle, a story where the crime is small, the tension is subtle, and the heart of the mystery lies not in punishment, but in understanding. So settle in, let the night slow its pace, and allow the streets of London to fade quietly into view. The snow had been falling since early afternoon, laying a soft white hush over the city. Gas lamps glowed faintly through the drifting flakes, and the streets of London moved with a quieter rhythm than usual, as though the season itself had asked the world to tread more gently. Inside Baker Street, the fire burned low and steady. Sherlock Holmes sat in his familiar chair, long fingers resting loosely together, his sharp eyes softened by the calm of the evening. Across from him, Dr. Watson leafed through a newspaper, though his attention wandered more often to the window, where the winter night pressed softly against the glass. Christmas was near. It announced itself everywhere, in the parcels carried under arms, in the faint sound of bells somewhere down the street, in the careful way strangers nodded to one another with a little more patience than usual. It was Watson who broke the silence. "An odd thing, Holmes," he said thoughtfully, "how the city seems to grow smaller at this time of year, as though everyone retreats inward." Holmes glanced up, a trace of amusement crossing his face. "On the contrary," he replied, "people reveal themselves more clearly during the holidays. Habit loosens its grip, routine fractures, and in the cracks truth becomes visible." Before Watson could respond, there came a knock at the door. Not the sharp, urgent rap of danger, but a hesitant one, polite, uncertain, and faintly apologetic. Moments later, a man was shown in. He was middle-aged, round of face, with the air of someone accustomed to routine rather than adventure. His coat was worn, his gloves damp from snow, and in his hands he carried a battered felt hat and a crumpled goose, tied carefully by its legs. Watson blinked. Holmes, however, leaned forward with interest. "Mr. Henry Baker," Holmes said calmly, as though greeting an old acquaintance. The man startled. Yes, sir, that's me, but I don't recall." "No need," Holmes interrupted gently. "You have come about the goose." Mr. Baker looked down at the bird, then back at Holmes, confusion written plainly across his face. "I was told," he said slowly, "that if I wished to see my property returned, I should come here, though I confess I don't understand how any of this came about." Holmes smiled, just faintly. "Then let us begin at the beginning," he said. "It is, after all, a most seasonal story." And so, as the fire crackled softly, and the snow continued its quiet descent outside, the tale unfolded. Earlier that evening, not far from Covent Garden, a small disturbance had broken out among the crowded streets. Voices were raised, a man had been knocked down, and in the brief confusion that followed, a battered hat, and a Christmas goose were left behind, abandoned by a man more eager to escape trouble than to reclaim his belongings. By chance, the items had found their way into Holmes's possession, and by deeper chance still, hidden within the goose itself, lay a gemstone of remarkable rarity and value, the Blue Carbuncle. Watson listened as Holmes recounted these details with measured calm, his voice steady, unhurried. "A jewel of that sort," Holmes continued, "does not wander into poultry by accident. Its presence speaks of panic, of haste, of a man seeking concealment rather than profit." Mr. Baker shifted uneasily. "I swear," he said, "I know nothing of any jewel. I found the goose fairly after it was given to me in apology for the scuffle. That's all." Holmes studied him carefully. There was no fear in the man's eyes, no calculation, only bewilderment and a mild concern for his supper. Watson saw it too. And in that moment the case changed. What might have become a simple matter of arrest and accusation instead turned inward, toward something quieter. Holmes dismissed Mr. Baker with his goose and hat restored, wishing him a pleasant Christmas. When the door closed behind him, Watson raised an eyebrow. "You let him go," he said. "Yes," Holmes replied, "because he was never the question." Outside, the snow thickened. Somewhere in the city, the true path of the jewel waited to be traced, not through fear or violence, but through observation, patience, and a subtle understanding of human nature. Holmes leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "You see, Watson," he said softly, "Christmas has a way of testing men, not by what they gain, but by what they choose to do when given the chance to do wrong." And as the night deepened, the quiet mystery of the Blue Carbuncle continued to unfold, not with urgency, but with the slow, thoughtful rhythm of a winter evening. Holmes rose at last and crossed the room, reaching for his coat with unhurried intent. The night beyond Baker Street had settled into that peculiar stillness London knew only in winter, when snow softened every sound and even the city's restless heart seemed willing to pause. "There is still a trail to follow," he said quietly, "and it leads not to grand houses or dark alleys, but to places far more ordinary." Watson followed him out into the cold. The streets were busy but subdued, lined with shop fronts glowing amber behind frost-touched glass. Vendors packed away their goods, their breath rising in pale clouds as they laughed and called to one another. The smell of roasting chestnuts lingered faintly in the air, mingling with coal smoke and damp wool. They walked without haste. Holmes led the way through narrow streets and open squares, past bakeries closing their shutters and taverns already warming with evening voices. At last they reached a modest shop, a poultry dealer's, its windows crowded with geese hung neatly by their necks, feathers fluffed and white as the snow beyond. Inside, the warmth was immediate. The proprietor, a man named Breckenridge, stood behind the counter, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked up sharply as the door opened, suspicion flickering across his face before settling into wary curiosity. "Evening," Holmes said politely. "We have come about a goose." Breckenridge snorted. "A goose?" he repeated. "You'll have to be more specific." Holmes smiled faintly and described it in careful detail, its size, its markings, the way it had been tied. As he spoke, Watson watched the poulterer's expression shift almost imperceptibly, from indifference to recognition, then quickly back again. "Aye," Breckinridge said at last, "I know the one. Sold it fair and square." "And from whom did you receive it?" Holmes asked, his tone mild. Breckinridge hesitated. "From a man who breeds them," he said slowly. "Name of Ryder, lives not far from here." The name passed between Holmes and Watson like a quiet signal. They thanked the poulterer and stepped back into the night, the snow now falling thicker, muffling the city beneath its steady descent. Ryder's lodging was small and unremarkable, one among many, its windows dark, its door worn smooth by years of use. Holmes knocked once. The man who answered was thin, nervous, his eyes darting like those of a creature accustomed to hiding. When Holmes spoke his name, Ryder's face drained of colour. "You found it," he whispered. Holmes did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He merely explained, calmly and precisely, how a man under pressure might conceal a jewel in the most unlikely of places, how panic could drive cleverness into folly, how fear often betrayed itself. Ryder sagged. The confession came not in drama, but in quiet collapse. The jewel had been stolen in a moment of opportunity, hidden in desperation, and lost to chance. Christmas, with its crowds and confusion, had offered cover but also exposure. Watson watched as Holmes listened, not unkindly, weighing the man before him not as a criminal, but as a human being standing at a crossroads. At last Holmes spoke. "You have a choice," he said gently. "One path leads to prison. The other leads away, not free of consequence, but free of further harm. You will restore what you have taken, and you will leave this city tonight." Ryder did not argue. When the door closed behind them, Watson exhaled slowly. "You let him go," he said again quietly. "Yes," Holmes replied, "because the law exists to prevent greater wrongs, and sometimes mercy does the same." They walked back through the snow, the city now nearly silent, the hour late. Baker Street welcomed them with familiar warmth, the fire still glowing patiently, as though it had never doubted their return. Watson hung his coat, lingering near the hearth. "It is an odd case," he said. "No villain truly punished, no great triumph." Holmes seated himself, folding his hands. "And yet," he said, "tell me if it does not feel complete." Watson considered this. Outside, a distant bell rang, soft, almost tentative, marking the approach of Christmas morning. Somewhere families gathered, somewhere a meal was prepared, somewhere a man began a journey away from temptation, carrying nothing but the weight of his choices. "Yes," Watson said at last, "it does." Holmes nodded. "The Blue Carbuncle," he said, almost to himself, "was never about the jewel. It was about what men do when no one is watching, and what they are given when someone chooses to see them clearly." The fire settled, the night deepened, and London, wrapped in snow and quiet forgiveness, drifted gently toward morning. The room grew quieter still, as if even the fire understood it was time to rest. Holmes remained by the hearth, his gaze unfocused, following thoughts that drifted far beyond Baker Street. The flames reflected faintly in his eyes, not sharp, not calculating now, but softened, almost distant. Watson had seen that look before. It was the look Holmes wore not when a case was solved, but when it had left something behind. Christmas, Holmes said at last, his voice low and even. An odd time for crime, don't you think? Watson smiled faintly. And yet a fitting one. Yes, Holmes agreed, because it strips people down, removes routine, exposes impulses they keep hidden the rest of the year, fear, greed, and sometimes conscience. Outside, the snow continued its patient fall, settling into corners and along ledges, smoothing the sharpness of the city. Somewhere far off, a carriage passed, its wheels muted by white streets. London felt less like a machine now, more like a living thing breathing in its sleep. Watson poured 2 cups of tea, the steam rising gently between them. Holmes accepted his without comment, warming his hands around the porcelain. Ryder was not born a criminal, Holmes went on, as though finishing a thought begun long ago. Most men are not. They stumble into wrongdoing the way one steps into fog gradually, without noticing how far visibility has shrunk. And the jewel? Watson asked. Holmes smiled faintly. Will return to its place, polished, locked away, admired and largely forgotten. Watson nodded. But the man will remember, exactly. They sat in silence after that, not the awkward silence of unfinished conversation, but the comfortable kind that comes only when nothing more needs to be said. The fire has grown quiet now, its glow barely more than a breath of warmth against the dark. Outside, the snow continues to fall, steady, unhurried, as if the night itself has decided there is no need to rush. Somewhere in London, a jewel has returned to silence. A man has been spared the weight of a single terrible mistake. And a small corner of the world has been allowed to settle back into balance. Perhaps that is the true gift of this story. Not the brilliance of deduction, nor the cleverness of the mind, but the reminder that understanding can sometimes be gentler than judgment. As you rest now, let the fog of Baker Street drift slowly away. Let the footsteps fade. Let the embers cool. Whatever thoughts you carry tonight, you do not need to solve them all at once. Some answers arrive only when the mind is still and the world is quiet. Thank you for spending this moment with Sleevore, for listening, for slowing down. Until our next story, may your night be calm, your rest be deep, and your dreams as soft as falling snow. Good night.